Where is God calling your student? At Judson College, we equip students to give their lives for the cause of Christ, wherever He calls them, whether that be the mission field, the workplace, or the local church. With more than 25 majors and 4 5-year bachelor's to master's programs, Judson College combines the best of conservative, biblical, and theological education with professional training in a vibrant Christian community. Learn more about how your students can be prepared to leverage their lives for the cause of Christ by visiting judsoncollege.com. Where is God calling your student? At Judson College, we equip students to give their lives for the cause of Christ, wherever He calls them, whether that be the mission field, the workplace, or the local church. With more than 25 majors and 4 5-year bachelor's to master's programs, Judson College combines the best of conservative, biblical, and theological education with professional training in a vibrant Christian community. Learn more about how your students can be prepared to leverage their lives for the cause of Christ by visiting judsoncollege.com.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Hal.
And I'm Melanie.
And we want to welcome you to another episode of Making Biblical Family Life Practical.
And this episode is being sponsored by
CTC Math. So stay tuned. We'll have some more information in a little bit. But
today we want to talk about graduation and specifically the timing of graduation.
Oh, wait a minute. It's summertime. Why do we want to talk about graduation now? We just did all of that.
Well, because it's actually something you need to think about way in advance. I'm not talking about whether you have it in May or June or whether you have it in the morning or afternoon.
Right.
But when do you actually graduate your child?
At what point in life?
Now, it may seem obvious. You think, well, when they're done with high school, but it's not really obvious. What do you decide is done with high school? We had some of our kids could have graduated at 14. They had enough credit, if I counted it that way.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Well, okay.
There are a couple of things in my history, Hal, that impacted that decision for us.
Okay. Like what?
When we were starting out many years ago, homeschooling, there was this family that got a lot of press in the secular press and among homeschoolers,
right? Because
they graduated their kids at like age 12 and they went to university at age 12. And a lot of my friends were really stewing about this. Should we be doing that? Should we be pushing our kids ahead faster? What should we be doing? But it didn't tip me.
And why didn't it?
Because when I was in high school, I went to a boarding school for gifted and talented kids.
Right.
It was one of the top high schools in the nation. And we had a 12-year-old in our class.
In your high school?
In my high school. In my junior and senior year. I think he was 12 when we were juniors.
Okay.
And I did not want our kids to be that kid because it was hard for him. He was very socially excluded. We didn't try to be mean to him or anything, but just he was in a different stage of life.
Well, totally. I mean, a 12-year-old is just, barely nudging into adolescence, and their perspective is going to be entirely different than an 18-year-old.
You had someone kind of similar to that in college.
Yeah, we had one of my classmates when I was in college. I was in an engineering program, which is pretty academically challenging, and we had a student, one of our classmates, who was, I think, 16 when I was a junior, and he was taking junior level courses, and he had the academic chops for it, but again, like you said, socially, he was always the oddball. He was always the odd one out. He wasn't in the same stage of life as people who are thinking about career and marriage, and they're thinking about moving into adulthood, and he's like not able to vote yet, and it was a very awkward thing for him.
Now, on the other hand, I remember quite a few years ago, a friend of ours graduated her son a year late. His father had died when he was a junior, I think.
Right.
And she just felt like he needed another year at home. And they just shifted his high school, to the last 4 years and graduated a year late. And I was blown away because I had never heard of anybody doing anything like that. And it didn't seem to hurt his chances at all. He went to the university, he got scholarships, but it made me realize that maybe this isn't as automatic a thing as we had been foreseeing. that you can graduate a child early, you can graduate a child late, that, there's a body of knowledge they need to get in high school.
Right.
But even when they finish that doesn't necessarily mean they're ready to take the next step into life, or that or on the other hand, maybe they just, there's a whole lot of factors there. There's social factors, there are emotional factors, there's spiritual factors.
Well, I think to start with, I think most of us have the school system mindset. This idea that at 6 years old, you start, and at 18 years old, you graduate from high school, and you get your driver's license when you're 16. And there's just this schedule that's just assumed, unless something has gone wrong, or unless you are you have academic superpowers or something. But for 99% of everybody, that was the course. You start at 6, you graduate at 18, and that's the way it shall always be. And I think what we don't recognize, I guess, is twofold. One of them is that because we run our own we run our school. We have a school. Mm-hmm. It is a legitimate, legally recognized school, and we can set our own standards. We can set our own timetable. That's the first thing. But the second thing is we need to recognize that the graduation from high school serves as a marker for a lot of different things.
Yes.
And we think of, when you graduate from high school, then automatically you should be able to vote, able to get married without permission. You need to be able to do this and another thing, and go on, and all this stuff that's all kind of lumped in together with high school graduation as an anchoring point in the middle of it. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
And so I think first off, I think that's a really good thing for homeschoolers to consider, that you have your own timetable that is based on your goals for your school, mm-hmm. your goals for your students' capabilities and interests. And, that there's a whole lot of things that factor in there that says you may graduate your child at 18, or you may graduate them at 19.
Or at 17.
Now,
so let's talk about those different options and some of the things that probably ought to be considered.
Mm-hmm.
First, graduating early. I have concerns about graduating early.
Right.
Because kids that are ready to graduate early are often gifted kids. And gifted kids are often academically advanced, but they tend to be immature emotionally.
They tend to have some struggles in other areas, partly
socially
because of that. Yeah, partly because of their academic interests and their natural giftedness there. They're going to naturally feel themselves drawn toward talking with people older than their age cohort, because they have more in common with what they read and what they think about and the way they think.
But may not have the maturity to avoid the bad influence
Yeah, and it makes them awkward in their own age group.
It really does.
It makes them difficult for them to relate to other 15-year-olds or 16-year-olds or whatever. And
I would absolutely not graduate a child very early, mm-hmm. because, well, most importantly, because once they leave your home, you're losing a lot of time discipling them that's you would otherwise have during a stage of their development that's critically important.
That is very, very much so.
And I wouldn't want to give up those years, but also because kids that start out in their adult life a lot earlier than others become known for that.
Well, like the family you mentioned, and I don't know what happened after the burst of media, but you can kind of imagine, just from people that you have run across in your career, that somebody who explodes on the scene 3 or 4 years, early by his age, okay, this is the whiz kid. He's got his college degree at age 19. Okay, great. Well, what's life like when he's 30? He's no longer stands out. He's no longer special.
And that can be really hard. I know, because I was in a very average, normal high school,
mm-hmm.
but I was a big academic fish.
Mm-hmm.
And then I transferred to this boarding school for gifted kids, where I was a very tiny fish in a big pond of very intelligent fish.
Well, it's kind of like you were kind of like a big fish surrounded by other big fish.
Well, it rocked my world, Hal.
I know, because
I found a lot of my value in being the bright kid.
Yes.
And suddenly I was just an average kid at this school full of bright kids.
Right.
And it was really difficult for me. And I cannot imagine how hard that would be, at 19, at 20, to suddenly realize nobody cares. Nobody cares when you're 30 years old, whether you graduated at 12 or not. So what are you doing for me today?
Well, I tell you what you're touching on there is something which I confess I've been very slow to pick up as I've gone through my process of maturing, but to recognize, where do you get your identity? Where do you get your sense of self-worth? How do I identify myself? If I make a business card for myself, what does my personal business card look like? And it's very easy. Kids in high school are trying to figure that out. They've never really, the first time in their life, they've had to sit down and say, what am I? Who am I?
What do I believe? Not just what do my parents believe.
And if they get loaded up or so early with, you are the smartest kid in the room, you are always at the top of the class, you always get straight A's, you are always the one that leads all of the activities, that's not really sustainable in real life. That
it's not.
That you will have disappointments. You will have things that you're not good at. You are going to have people who just don't like you. And, and yes, if we have a child who gets locked onto that idea of, I'm the precocious, the intellectual one in the room, the day will come when nobody cares. And that will really,
it's hard.
Really rock their world.
And you've got a child much younger than everybody else in a room full of people they may be very vulnerable to.
Yeah.
And so I'm against graduating kids really early. That does not mean that I am not for challenging them intellectually. But there's a lot you can do to do that at home. You can do CLEP exams. You can do AP exams. You can, do difficult classes online. Mm-hmm. There's a lot you can do to challenge them intellectually without putting them outside your home. I wouldn't let my kids go to the school that I graduated from because I value our influence in their lives too much. Mm-hmm. And I think they need that extra time at home maturing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we can provide them with that kind of education from right here.
Yeah.
One of our kids graduated the whole, bouquet of AP classes under his belt. That's fine. That also means I'm hesitant to put a child in dual enrollment without making very sure that they're not just academically ready. Got to make sure of that because college transcripts stay with you forever.
Right.
But that they are emotionally and spiritually ready for that. Yeah, because it's young kids in with much older people.
Right.
Let's talk for a minute about graduating late because that kind of blew me away. And then we had a situation where it seemed wise to graduate a child late.
Why don't we take a minute and hear from our sponsor, CTC Math.
Okay, and when we get back, we'll talk about, what about graduating late? Is there ever a reason to do that?
Okay.
See you in a minute.
Are you looking for a new math curriculum? Well, CTC Math specializes in providing online video tutorials that take a multi-sensory approach to learning. Favorably reviewed in Kathy Duffy's 102 Top Picks and the Old Schoolhouse Crew Review. The lessons are short and concise to help your children break down concepts and appreciate math in a whole new way. The lessons are taught the traditional way, not to the test. Each one of the video tutorials is taught by an internationally acclaimed teacher, Pat Murray, who is renowned for teaching math concepts in a simple, easy-to-understand way and in only a few minutes at a time. Using a multi-sensory approach, having the combination of effective graphics and animation synchronized with the voice of a friendly teacher together with practical assessment, even students who struggled with math are getting fantastic results. And the ones that were doing okay before now are doing brilliantly. Visit CTC Math today and start your free trial. That's ctcmath.com.
All right. Well, welcome back. So we're talking about, when do you graduate? When do you tell that young person, hey, you're done with your high school education. Here's your diploma. And we just talked about, maybe we would not encourage going early, just because there's a lot of maturation. There's a lot of discipleship that goes on those last couple of years.
I would also not encourage going really late. Like, I know some families who their kids dragged their feet with finishing some assignments that mom wanted them to do, and mom withheld their diploma up into their 20s. I would not do that to my child. I would find a way, negotiate with them, find a way to finish up, get them their diploma so they can move on to the next step.
Well, because like we were talking about earlier, that high school diploma is a stand-in for a lot of other things. And so, like, they're going to have a hard time finding a job if they don't have a high school diploma. There's things that you'll let a 16-year-old do but you would not let them do the same job as an 18-year-old.
Yeah. But there may be a reason to graduate a year late. We've done that more than once. With one child, he had learning disabilities. He learned to read very late.
Yes.
It took him a long time to get going academically. And I realized when he was a junior, he was making enormous progress. And I sat him down and I said, son, I've been thinking about this a lot. We can graduate you next year on time with a decent high school education. But I think if we went another year, you could have an excellent high school education, which may help you going into college.
Right.
So you need to make that decision, though, because you're going to be an adult and you're going to have to choose to be under my authority for that year academically.
Right.
And so he thought about it for about 3 weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't a snap decision.
No, he stewed about it for 3 weeks. And then he came back and he said, I think you're right, Mom. I think we ought to go another year. And we did. And it did not hurt him at all. He got a full ride scholarship to college. And he did great there. He has a great career now.
He got on campus at age 19 and nobody cared.
Nobody cared.
That was the thing that just kind of blew me away, because I had that public school mentality. And it wasn't like, oh, you got held back a year. But rather it was like, so what? Hi.
Because kids take gap years for a variety of reasons. Some kids might take a year of travel or hike the Appalachian Trail, so nobody really cares.
And a lot of times you have people that are coming back after they've been out. They went in the military. Yeah, they went in the Army for a few years, and they're using their benefit
to save money.
Yeah, and so there's more age diversity at the same class level in college, and
absolutely.
So it didn't really make a difference. Didn't matter socially.
Right.
It didn't matter academically at all.
We've also made that decision for health reasons. We had a child who got Lyme disease in the middle of high school. Yeah. And he basically lost a year of his high school. Yeah. And had to kind of work at half speed for 2 years. And so he graduated a year late. Again, got to college, did well.
Got academic scholarships.
Nobody cared. And he's a college graduate now, doing great in his career.
Right.
And so there can definitely be good reasons to graduate a year late, to graduate a year early. Maybe there's an opportunity that will close if they don't graduate a year early. But I wouldn't stretch it much beyond that, because we do want our kids to graduate, and we want them to take the next step out into the adult world. And we don't want to throw them into the adult world too early when they're not emotionally and spiritually ready for it.
Right.
And so I think this is something you got to use your judgment and wisdom and pray about and talk to your kids about.
That's an important thing, because as you said with our first one that we did this, recognize that once they cross that 18-year-old threshold, diploma or no diploma, legally they are adults and they can do what they want. Yeah. And if they choose to stay around and take your guidance, then that's great. That's as it should be, but you can't depend on that. And so it is good to acknowledge, hey, you're legally an adult. You have to make your own decisions about your own life. Here is what we would suggest, or here's what we would advise.
And why?
You might want to consider that and let us know how we can help. And so that's, if coming in and getting the buy-in with it. And we've had some friends who had kids who dragged their feet and just didn't seem to get their act together. And I think there does come a point, as you say, graduating a year late, lot of different reasons you do that, but if you're getting to 20 or 21 and they still haven't got their high school diploma,
that's going to be an issue.
That is going to be an issue, and it's already been an issue getting doors open for them.
Yeah, and so now some practical things about graduating late.
Yeah.
You don't have to organize your transcript like everybody else.
Right.
You can organize it by subject instead of chronologically, so that it's not as obvious that if you've taken an unusual path through high school.
Right.
Sometime like missed a year in the middle due to health or whatever.
Yeah.
Just to show them that you've got all the standards met. And I think that these same things are things that should be considered, even if your kids aren't going to college. Like, let's say you've got a kid who's starting a business, who is going to work somewhere. We still need to think about these issues and think, is this child ready to be out in the workforce? Is this someone who is mature enough to stand, if they get in a hostile environment to their faith? Is this somebody that can resist bad influences? Because, your boy who's gifted at business may have started his own business. He may be ready to take off and in high school at 17, but maybe he needs a little bit more time at 16 or 17. Maybe he needs a little bit more time, with his parents to work through some other issues.
Well, and in that kind of a situation like you just described, I think that's a great opportunity to have them doing like half-day apprenticeship or orientation programs or something where they're getting some experience that's still at a low level, that they can still process at a teenager's mindset. And
your high school doesn't have to look like anyone else's.
No, it doesn't.
They are expected to know certain things just to be a citizen and part of life. And so that what you're doing also doesn't limit them in the future should they decide to go a different route later. As many kids do, they might start out and say, there's no way I'm going to college. And at 24, they want to go to college.
Right.
They need to learn some things in high school, but your high school does not have to, follow the same order as everybody else's or do things the same way as everybody else's. Use the freedom that you have to do what your kid needs.
All right. Well, so we have not graduated anybody early. We've graduated some right at 18. We've graduated some had gone for an extra year for a couple of different reasons, but they've all excelled and they've all done well. And I think that giving them the time to kind of put a finish on your hands-on discipleship, so to speak, I think has been very beneficial to our kids. Even the ones who are precocious enough to get the academic credit at 15 or 16.
Yes.
They really benefited from a few more years at home learning adulting.
Well, it wasn't the academics that challenged our kids in college. Our kids are moving into a culture that is very different than the one that we graduated into, that when we were young adults.
Yeah. And
the pressures are much higher. The temptations are stronger, and it's generally not the professors. It's generally the other students.
No, and I'll tell you what, it's not just something for parents who are coming from a Christian worldview. I mean, there's so much stuff that is just unhealthy in the culture right now, that is unhealthy for the developing minds and emotions of young people. And it doesn't matter what your religious background is. You can just look at it and say, this doesn't end well. And young people need to go out there and recognize that there's a reason that culture has developed what it has and that societies are built the way they are. And if you just burn it all down, you better have some improvement set in place, because
there's a lot going on with Gen Z, the 11 to 26-year-old generation right now.
Yeah.
A high incidence of mental illness. So high, we
like
couldn't
over
believe it.
50%.
When we read the research, it was so shocking.
It was like over 50% have a medical diagnosis of mental illness.
Oh, the 18 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah.
And social anxiety, social isolation. There's so many things going on, and make sure your kids are ready before you put them out there in it. Now, make sure they are ready so that they can walk out in it and stand. Raise adults. You don't hang on and keep them kids forever. Raise adults. But I think you should take every minute you need right now. Don't let them go too soon.
And can we put one plug in there to say, you know what? Those last few years, you need to be sure you've built a relationship that you can keep communicating with them when they leave your home, that they will want to hear your advice, that they will come with their questions. Say, how do I handle this? Where do I go from here?
Can I give them a freebie?
You give them a freebie. Yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Go to
You've been listening to
raisingrealmen.com.
Making
Yep.
Biblical
/not
Family Life Practical with
lose
Hal and
teens.
Melanie Young.
Right.
If you found this program interesting, challenging, and encouraging, why not join us on the web
for free
at
download of our workshop, How Not to Lose
halandmelanie.com.
Your Teens,
That's
and it talks about how to build that kind of relationship.
Yes, indeed.
HALANDMELANIE.com.
So we do
Or
appreciate
follow
you
us on
joining us.
social
We're
media.
trying to take
You can find us on
biblical principles
Facebook at
into the 21st century family.
Facebook/HalandMelanie
And
or
I hope you'll join us again sometime. My name's Hal.
/RaisingRealMen.
And I'm Melanie.
And so
This
thank you for
program is a
listening.
production
or
of
watching.
the Ultimate
Bye, y'all.
Homeschool
Bye-bye.
Radio Network. Join us next week. We'll be
You've
back
been
to
listening
talk
to
about making biblical family life practical with Hal and Until then,
Young.
thank you, and God bless you for listening. Interesting, challenging, and encouraging. Why not join us on the web at halandmelanie.com. That's HALANDMELANIE.com. Or follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at Facebook/Hal and Melanie or Facebook.com/RaisingRealMen. This program is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Join us next week when we'll be back to talk about making biblical family life practical. Until then, thank you and God bless you for listening.